Thank you for joining me for another Quick Hits conversation. I'm Dr. Robyn. With me today, I have Michael Davis. He is the founder of Speaking CPR, where he helps business leaders and speakers improve their presentations and speeches. I have Dave Roberts. He's an adjunct professor of psychology and psychology of child life at Unica University. He is also an author and a bereavement support specialist. And I have Karen Loomis, the founder of No Moss Brands. She has 20 years as a marketing and branding professional. She's also an adjunct professor at Grand Canyon University. She is passionate about social change, is in the process of writing her book. The question I have for the three of you, this comes from a post that Karen created. Where is the line between embellishment and lying? Karen, you gave us this idea, you kick us off.
Yeah, so it's funny because this tends to be a more of a political conversation, but I want to make sure that we understand that this happens in our day-to-day lives as well. Is a little white lie okay to tell someone they look great when maybe their shirt isn't exactly the best shirt for them? Is that just a little white lie, or does that lead to greater things? Is it embellishment where you're just putting the cherry on top, making things look a little better than they are? Or is it just a flat out lie? And that's the part where when you talk to individuals, most individuals line up on the side of lying is absolutely not allowed. But then it gets fuzzy as you kind of crawl into the other areas on whether or not embellishment is considered lying. And in my opinion, if you are embellishing to get ahead, it now becomes a lie. And so for me, it's embellishment to perhaps say, I'm good at swimming when maybe all I can do is tread water. That's an embellishment. But when it becomes something that I am now trying to become the university swim coach, now that is a significant part of my qualifications that is now in question. And so this whole thing came from the idea of Santos, obviously the politician, who did the traditional lying on his resume, which has been a topic that has happened over my whole entire lifetime. And there's been incidents where people have lost their positions as a result. It just kind of occurred to me, I think it's really interesting that we as a society will say one thing to each other, but do something completely different.
I think that's fascinating, Karen, and love your analogy of swimming to just embellish versus to get a job. And it's interesting to me with this topic how if I do it, it's embellishment. If you do it, it's a lie. There's this moral judgment comes in. But as someone who works with people on presentations and story, I deal with this a lot with folks because I tell them that when you're sharing a story, it has to have happened to you. Your story has to be true. However, it doesn't have to be 100% factual. And some people jump on that and say, well, I'm lying. No, you're not. Here's the problem with traditional storytelling, the way a lot of people do it. They give us every detail. We get bored, right? What we want to do is compress time and get to what we call the emotional truth of a story. You can fudge a couple of facts as long as those facts are minor details. For example, I could say, yeah, I was on Robyn's Quick Hits podcast last week and I wore a red jacket. I'm not wearing a red jacket, but who cares? Versus saying, oh, what we talked about was the major differences between liberalism and conservatism. No, we didn't talk about that at all. That's a lie. There's a difference. Is what's the emotional truth of the story? And if it's consistent with the point you're trying to make, then we say, yeah, you can fudge those facts. That's more embellishment.
So it sounds like you're saying similar to what Karen's saying is it's fine as long as you're not trying to promote yourself by embellishing or telling a half truth.
As I was thinking about the question, I was thinking that there's certain levels of embellishment. I think some are probably less harmful than others. Like, for example, I could tell you I was a petroleum transfer engineer, when in reality, all I did is pump gas, but I pumped gas, but I'm telling you I'm a petroleum transfer engineer just to get you sucked into the narrative of my story. So there's a certain amount of embellishment I think they can get, as long as it's embellishing true facts, where you're trying to at least highlight certain things to get people at least interested in your narrative, and then you go from there. Or lying is just simply telling untruths, a statement that are not based in fact. There's a story that I tell about a linking object that I have that reminds me of a memory of my daughter. And every time I tell that story, I may embellish on different things. Like if it was a summer day, I might say it was the brightest summer day around. In reality, it probably wasn't, but it was brightest because my daughter was a part of that. So as my narrative identity evolves, the way I embellish, as long as it's based on true fact, may be different. My story may come out differently depending on what's going on at that particular moment.
It's interesting though, because Michael brought something up that made me think of an ex-boyfriend who used to say, hey, don't let the truth stand in the way of a good story.
Yep.
As a storyteller, I can appreciate that. But at the same time, there's a line that we're all looking for that you don't cross. And when it comes to your qualifications for jobs, to most Americans, that tends to be the line that we don't want people to cross, because we expect or have this preconceived notion that people in certain positions should have higher morals and ethics regarding truth and not truth. And so when we have somebody like a politician who has risen to a level where they can impact others with their lies, it makes you go like, well, how much of what they're saying is actually true? Which you never, I was gonna say, you never want to question a politician, but don't we always question politicians? So I realized the hypocrisy in that statement right there.
So is it about if people don't know about it, then it doesn't count as a lie?
Yeah, if you know about it, it's a lie, and you know it. I've heard this for years in my business. People say, I'm going to make up a story. Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. Here's the thing about that. Audiences today are the most distrusting. I've never seen a society more distrusting than it is right now. With that in mind, if you make up a story, they're listening very carefully to you. And the moment you have some questionable comment later, but referring back to the story, if there's a disconnection there, they're going to call you out and they're never going to trust you again. That's why I say, tell your story. It's there. Dave, great example, Dave, about how you changed some facts based on your daughter's presence in the story. Was it more sunny or not? Nobody's going to call you out on that, because that's an interpretation. She was there. It was sunny. Also, each of us with our stories, they should evolve because we have a different perspective on our stories as time goes on. Does that mean we're lying? No, my perspective was different 5 years ago than it is today.
And if our perspective shifts, the way we view our own identity and the way we view the stories that are going to shift. It's just a natural process.
What happens when someone else is part of the story and they remember it differently, or they call you out for it? Then what? People
are going to see you the way they want to see you. So it really doesn't matter.
But it makes me wonder sometimes if there's a gender difference, because I look at myself when it comes to my master's degree. Often I drop the last two letters of the four letters. It's MSCI, because no one knows what the CI stands for. Well, it stands for college instruction. All of a sudden, I really needed that, and I hadn't been using it. I wonder if women are more likely to squash their accomplishments versus men are more likely to expand their accomplishments. And I don't have an answer to that. I'm just throwing that out.
Before we turn the recording on, I shared with the guys that, because I don't think you were here yet, Karen, that I saw someone on LinkedIn who had doctor in her name and then the initials ABD. Which, if you're not in academia, most people don't know what that means, but it means she didn't finish her dissertation. And I actually reached out to her and I was like, so you're using the DR dot, but you're ABD. And she's like, well, I wrote it. I just never defended it. I'm like, but you're ABD. That to me was lying.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but I was also thinking to give her credit for actually including that abbreviation, because most people would just say, oh, to hell with it, nobody will know. And I look at that as similar as using the doctor qualifier, but you're no longer in that industry. So I have somebody that I know who used to be a chiropractor and now is a coach and is using the doctor term in her coaching practice. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing at all. And to me, in my mind, maybe that's the lack of information, hoping that you will infer something from that title. And that's a form of embellishment and lying in itself.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah. We could go on and on and on about this, but that is our 10 minutes. So I'm going to cut us off there. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I do think that the line between embellishment and lying first sounds really clear. Like, yeah, we know what that means. And then you talk about it and you're like, oh my goodness, this is so gray. So thank you so much for having this conversation with me. And I look forward to speaking to each of you again really soon. And that's not an embellishment.
Mhm.